Welcome, everyone. I'm Marcia Meskimen. I'm the director of the IAS, and I'm very, very pleased to be welcoming you to the second day of this event, which I have to say I found absolutely wonderful and stimulating, and also really, really heartening yesterday. And I wanted to thank the two speakers very much again for their presentations, and really welcome the next three. I'll be turning over to Antonia and Mike to sort of say a few words about the event particularly, and they obviously have their MA students to introduce the speakers and so forth as per yesterday. And I take it to do another one of the wonderful drawings that that sum up the events that we saw yesterday, and I think Antonia is about to share. But from the IAS, let me say that this is again there's the drawing. Hooray, hooray! This is the summary of yesterday, which was just fantastic. But on behalf of the IAS, I wanted to say again that this is the second of the Design Leadership Summits that we've hosted as a partnership with the School of Design and Creative Arts. And it's really a pleasure to be doing these, because they're not only about the kind of, the greatest people and the most interesting research that Loughborough and international colleagues are doing together in networks, but they are about setting a future agenda. And I was thrilled to be listening to people working so closely in this field, and how you have such a finger on the pulse of what is coming next and how the directions are moving, and an optimistic sense of the future as well, a kind of real excitement. I think Mike referred to it as a kind of lurking utopianism or something like that, but that was a great kind of way of doing it. And it was really an exciting event to hear about. We are joined today for part of this by our Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research, Steve Rothberg. And I want to invite Steve to say something about, to welcome us all. And we're delighted to have you here today, Steve. Over to you.
Thank you, Marcia. And it's great to be with you here at the beginning of this session. I'm Steve Rothberg. I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research. And so on behalf of the whole institution, let me wish a warm welcome to everybody, especially to our speakers here today, to William, Virtue and Michael. I'm very aware also that the programme says that, William, your session began at 4 o'clock, so I'll try not to speak for very long so as not to knock you off your schedules. I'm also told that there are participants today, not just from the US and Turkey, but also from South Africa, Kenya, Norway and Brazil, and by the magic of the counter on the Zoom screen, I can see that there are 44 participants in here, though I know also that that's an underestimate, because I think Antonia counts as one participant, and I see lots of people in her room, and some of the other screens showed multiple people on them as well. So wherever you are from today, it's absolutely fantastic to have you with us for this event. And when I got the notice just to say a few words of welcome, I thought, blimey, these people must be keen, because it's 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon in the UK, and the faint-hearted don't arrange meetings that start at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. But then I looked a little bit more closely, and of course I can see, I think it's 7 p.m. in Ankara, is it, Virtue? If you're in Ankara, you're right. And I think, Michael, is 8 a.m. in Washington, is it? Something along those kind of lines. So I think our extent west to east means that we're somewhere in the middle here in the UK, and that explains it. But when I thought about it again, I suspected that there might be quite a bit of partying going on in the US at the moment. So getting people to get up at 8 a.m. for a meeting did indeed demonstrate even greater commitment than people in the UK coming together for a 4 p.m. on a Friday meeting. So wherever you're from and whatever your circumstances, great to have you all with us. Under Mike's leadership and Antonia's very significant support, the Storytelling Academy has become quite a prominent part of the research profile at Loughborough over quite a short period, really, and over a similar period. The Institute of Advanced Studies has grown from scratch to the point where pre-pandemic we'd hosted 194 fellows from 34 countries. Now, Marcia may already have told you that particular number, or indeed may be about to, some other opportunity. But we're so proud of the way that participation has built around the Institute of Advanced Studies, and so proud actually of the substance of the relationships that we're building through IAS. I hope you won't mind if we repeat ourselves a little bit on how successful we've been. I hope you enjoyed being part of the Leadership Summit on Applied Storytelling so far, because I think this is part 2 of 2. And I was absolutely delighted to see that there's a plan to get together in person next summer. Let's keep our fingers crossed that will be possible, and it would be great to host you all over in Loughborough. You can see on this background here, I move my hand, I can't quite see my hand, can I? There it is. Now look, in my background here, that's not very easy to do, is it? This is a real background. This isn't one of those Zoom things. You can see that the sun, even at 4 o'clock on a Friday in November, the sun always shines in Loughborough. And when you come to visit us next summer, I can guarantee these blue skies for you and a warm welcome. And I'm sure if the slide that I saw a few minutes ago is anything to go by, spirited and entertaining and valuable discussion while you're with us. Events like these, not just about the one-off event, they are a catalyst for longer term collaborations, and I'm sure your discussions are going to spark the great ideas for work that we can do together. So great to have you all with us. I'll hand you back to Marcia now, I think, and you can get stuck into your next session. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Yeah, I'm going to hand over to Mike and Antonia now to actually get it going. And I agree, we've taken a little bit of an extra time today, but I'm sure it's going to go quite effectively from here. Thanks.
Mike, if you want to say a few words, in the meantime, we organize the presentation of the first speaker. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just fill in a little bit of time then while William's getting set up. Just to say, it's great to see everyone back again after yesterday. As I suppose most people were, I was reflecting on yesterday, and it reminded me it led me to look back at the work of someone I haven't looked at since I was a student, and that's the German philosopher Ernst Bloch, who wrote about the spirit of utopia and also the principle of hope, his two major works. And it was very interesting because what Bloch talks about a lot is daydreaming, and daydreaming as a form of storytelling, of utopian storytelling that we're all engaged with every day, mainly with ourselves as our own audiences. But Bloch very interestingly talks about daydreams as being the building blocks of hope, and that creativity is the sort of fuel, I suppose, that helps us turn daydreams into art, including storytelling. And he quotes Freud around daydreams being the sort of the raw material of poetic production, which is a phrase I quite like. But that then led me to look at, or to come across a quotation from Eric Klinger, who's a psychologist from the University of Minnesota. I think he's an emeritus professor there now. And I found a quotation that very much reminded me of the John Berger quotation that I said yesterday. And I just wanted to read this very briefly because I thought it summed up some of the things we were thinking about yesterday. And he's talking about daydreams here, and he says that daydreams remind you and can occasionally incite you to stick up for yourself against your surroundings. To people in charge of order, the defenders and apologists for the established civilization, they constitute potential resistance, collectively, at least, a nuisance, and in extreme cases, a menace. And I quite like that idea of storytelling being a nuisance to the establishment, and ourselves being a nuisance, maybe even a menace at times, and certainly as a form of resistance and hope. And when we were talking about missing voices yesterday, I thought, well, actually, that's even more important, that we have those moments of resistance and nuisance to challenge ourselves all the time, even if we are part of that establishment. We always need to be questioning ourselves and challenging ourselves and not letting ourselves think that we've always got things right, we can't do better. And I think stories help us be our own nuisances as well at times. Anyway, I just thought I would share that with you just to help us underway. And I'll hand over to Antonia, who I think is going to introduce, beneath the mask, I think that may be Vicky, is it? Yes. Who's going to do the introduction.
So as we did yesterday, just for the participants who weren't with us yet, we are keeping, sorry, the distance. As we did yesterday, we have our new MA storytelling students who are introducing each speaker, one of them, each speaker. And we agreed yesterday, peacefully, that we are going to keep the discussion for the second half. If you have any burning questions, please use the chat box after each of the talks, and then we'll go back to those questions at the end of the 3 talks. We are very, very excited about having here these 3 fellows today. But again, I'm very, very grateful to have again the 2 speakers from yesterday. We had a fantastic, inspiring time with them. So thank you again. Grazie mille, Ruhi and Lisa, for your talks yesterday, and welcome to the 3 speakers today. So Vicky, to you.
William Uricchio is Professor of Comparative Media Studies at MIT and Professor Emeritus of Comparative Media History at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. He is also founder and principal investigator of the MIT Open Documentary Lab and principal investigator of the Co-Creation Studio. His scholarly research considers the interplay of media technologies and cultural practices in relation to representation, knowledge, and publics. A specialist in old media when they were new, he explores such things as early 19th century conjectures among photography, telegraphy, and computation, the place of telephony in the development of television at the other end of the 19th century, and the work of algorithms in our contemporary cultural lives. His current research examines interactive environments such as games, immersive technologies such as virtual reality, location-based augmented reality, and recursive algorithmic AI systems. William explores the narrative possibilities of these unstable media in which users can wander and construct their own textual paths or experience text generated in conversation with the system. He is interested in narrative as a cultural operating system and the implications of expanded and co-created story worlds for social cohesion. The recipient of Guggenheim, Humboldt, and Fulbright Awards and the Berliner Mercator Prizes, William has also held professional appointments in Sweden, Stockholm, Germany, FU Berlin, Marburg, Denmark, National Dream Professor, and China University of Science and Technology. His most recent book, co-authored with Katerina Sisek, is Collective Wisdom, Co-Creating Media Within Communities Across Disciplines and with Algorithms.
Well, okay. Shall I take it from here? I will take it from here. Let me jump to my screen in that case. Okay. First of all, thanks so much for the invitation to be here, and apologies for missing yesterday. I had to teach. I'm based in the Netherlands right now, teaching at MIT, and it's kind of a weird schedule. But what I want to talk about today, I really appreciate the topics that were covered yesterday, and I'm going to talk a bit about structures of story and how they're changing. And actually, in that last bit of the introduction, you kind of heard the tropes that I'll be covering today. I want to cover 3 areas. One is, really familiar. We're all brought up in it, the storytelling tradition. But I want to introduce 2 other terms: story finding and story algorithms, and the kinds of stories that they produce. Because these are spaces we're quickly moving into. It's not that one is displacing another, they're really just kind of making more complicated the story worlds that we can encounter. So we'll start with what we know. And the book that we know and love, and the notion of narrativity that comes to us through literary theory really is ultimately about stability. And I think why stories have had such traction in our world Someone's mic is on and it could be off. Yeah, thank you. Is because they sort of hold our cultural operating systems. If you think what the great books do, the Quran or the Judeo-Christian Bible, they embody a body of knowledge, a set of operating systems that just get passed from generation to generation and give us cultural coherence. So I think in that sense, these stories are pretty powerful. Stories in this sense, in the storytelling tradition, in terms of the theoretical substance, have something of a media bias. The ways in which we talk about narrativity and story tend to assume things like books and films, things that are in fact stable platforms, things with a fixed sequence of events. The sequence in the Bible matters, or in the Quran matters. Agency, I mean, we can defer it to God, that's a little bit vague, or we can attribute it to people, but at least we have a claim to know who this is. And all of these systems share a structure, a pattern of one-to-many dissemination. So this is the world we know. It's the world that most of our, when we say storytelling, this is, storytelling, this is kind of the domain we refer to. And we all know it, we love it, but I think all of us have also experienced a different kind of story. And that's what happens when we play a system where we kind of have a set of rules, we inhabit characters, we have conclusions, the story, these encounters end. And I think if you were to ask any kid to describe what happens when they play, what would come out is emphatically narrative. This too is a story, but it's a story you discover, a story you inhabit. And in fact, this idea, which I'm going to call story finding, a cultural critic like Carlo Ginzburg would say, this is the oldest narrative form we have. Ginzburg locates the origins of narrative with the Venetic tradition, a tradition where we are in the world, we find things, footprints, bits of fur on a twig, we have bits of knowledge about the environment, a stream is up ahead, and through that we construct a kind of causal narrative, a narrative of coherence from a world of possibility. If I were in this same world, I don't think I'd see much. I'd see tire tracks maybe, but I don't think I'd do what a hunter does. So Ginzburg says this is actually the root, the origins of narrativity. Writing them down came later. Telling them comes after, sitting around the fire and telling the story. But first we have to find the story in the world. And if I think of where today's media technologies are, they're very much about activating this tradition. Narrative environments and collaborative story finding abound in our world. Wandering, playing, hunting, discovering in immersive theater, in domains like interactive fiction, in museums, theme parks, but also virtual reality or alternate reality games or interactive domains, interactive digital games. These are systems where someone makes an environment and we collaborate with that maker. In this case, it's Walt Disney. Disneyland is an environment that's built. 20 people go into that place, 20 people discover 20 different experiences, have 20 different stories to tell at the end of it. And they're all thematically coherent. They're all bound. They're all branded Disney. But I would argue that this experience, along with in line with Ginzburg, is an emphatically narrative one. So in this case, we have an idea of narrative as an environment rather than a specific text. And it's an environment that holds many possible texts, there's a lot of potentials and they need to be activated. Collaborative authorship is the remit here. And it's enacted by the reader, the viewer, working with the architect of the environment. Agency is shared and multiple and shifting points of view are possible. And rather than a one-to-many scenario, which the book has or the film has, in this case, story finding is deeply personalized, highly personalized and engaging. We follow our instinct, we follow our interests, we find our own story, the story that makes most sense to us within the options available. So we encounter both of these forms all the time. If I'm in London and I jump on a bus, I get a great story told to me and the other 50 people on the bus, and it's linear and it's a fixed story and we all learn a lot and it's terrific. But if I wander around, I also am finding stories. I'm stopping where I want to stop. I'm attending to a different level of detail. I at least really watch for street signs. I need to be able to find my way back. I'm intrigued by certain kinds of shops and might go in and have a, so all to say, it's a different kind of story, but it's a narrative experience. And where this has been picking up steam, especially in the last 20 years, is in a bunch of fields outside literary theory. So if you were to look at history or historiography, someone like Hayden White is talking about the narrative construction of reality. Or in the world of psychology, people like Jerome Bruner and McAdams are talking about narrative psychology, embodied narrative for someone like Turner. So all to say, in a lot of different fields outside literature, narrativity has become really important as a way to talk about coherent experiences that have a particular kind of structure, and as a vehicle for communication about that experiential domain. So this really kind of shifts the lens outside the literary domain into a transdisciplinary domain, but it's in this space where the kind of flexibility for the concept emerges and is useful. So just to summarize these 2 points, Bambi as the book is an authored tradition, one-to-many, a fixed narrative structure, and it's very easy to commodify and collect. No wonder we have libraries and archives full of these kinds of stories. But story finding is, in this case, authorship is really about the ecosystem and not the text. It's a unique story. It's my encounter with this space. It's a user-enacted narrative experience, and naturally, it's ephemeral. So these experiences are very difficult to commodify, very difficult to collect, and therefore they're kind of invisible in our academic world. It's a lot easier to talk about the things we can collect, and a lot trickier to talk about things that are as ephemeral as these story-finding experiences. Now, what I want to do is just jump over to something that's emerging, that's not quite with us. It's a little bit with us. I mean, I'll give some examples, but this is really a game changer in terms of, I think, the way we're going to have stories delivered to us. And like any tool, an algorithm is nothing more than a tool. It can be used for good or bad, and we need to keep an eye on these and develop a critical language. That's really the whole point of this talk. We need to think critically and develop a critical language so that we can contend with these things when they enter the world. A number of you, I hope, have seen the Bandersnatch episode of Black Mirror. This was a branch narrative with, they claimed, up to 1 billion possible variants. And basically, you sat there with your remote control in hand and made decisions, clicked your way through a bunch of choices throughout the episode. So what I'm going to talk to you about here is, imagine being automatically navigated through this narrative, not having to touch the remote control, just sitting there and watching it. In a scenario where your past behaviors, the system knows what you like to watch, it knows what tolerances you have for violence or for whatever, and real-time biomarkers, for example, where you're looking, or pupillary dilation, where these are the key components of a guidance system. You sit there and watch, and the system guides you through your narrative. This is your path through Disneyland, and you don't have to lift a finger. You're just taken there. That's the scenario I want to sketch. And I just want to use Alice here because, like the mirror that she walks through, the world on the other side is not quite her world. It's informed by her world. It kind of echoes her world, but in her case, a bit of a darker, twisted world. That difference is crucial, and we'll come back to this slide. But basically, I want to say these systems are recursive. That is to say, the algorithms and the sensors here are basically reading us. They're looking at our data trails, and they're looking at our behaviors to structure the story we're seeing. These are combining elements of the found story and the told story in this sense that what we encounter is a stable text that realizes one of many possibilities, but it's been cooked on the fly for us. Authorship here is deferred. It's something that's happening between the designers of the system and the algorithms, their perceptions of our interest. And there's a recursive relationship here between the text, the authors, and the system. And I think the thing that's tricky and that we have to think about for the future is agency. Unlike the author that I probably can find out in the storytelling tradition, or unlike my own agency in the story finding tradition, here there's another player, the system and the algorithm, and it's a little unclear who that represents. I want to just start with a shot of a Google page, because this is just to indicate that we're already walking down this path. When you do a Google search, in this case, I don't know, 6 trillion out of 6,800,000,000,000 possible results, this thing popped up. And why? Because the system knows that right now I'm English speaking primarily. I speak Dutch, but English is my default language. It knows where I am in the Netherlands. The ads that I would see on the side or whatever comes up in a search is a partial 0.7 of a second curation from a huge world of data for you based on what it knows about your language, your location, and what you've been doing prior to that search. All of that is used to make a special cuvee for you on the fly. That is pretty powerful stuff. And just think of this tool, if this computational ability were deployed in the purposes for the interests of story. Well, it's happening. This is a piece from 2015, so 5 years ago, New York Times. And basically, this was an article about, would you know if you were reading something that was computer generated? And there was a test alongside it. And I guarantee you that it would be very difficult to beat the test. These things are already abundant parts of our life, especially in at least in the world of journalism, in sectors like sports and finance, which are very structured data sets. Prose can be generated on the fly to fit those. This is a company, Narrative Science, that really started they started around 2012. And really, until recently, their business model has been writing stories for newspapers and writing stories for BuzzFeed, synopses or whatever. They've discovered a more lucrative market, which is turning data into prose, into personalized plain English for the business world. So this basically takes whatever kind of data is flying into your computer and it storyfies it on the fly in individual terms. There's a whole ecosystem of these kind of companies, and they can do that kind of they go where the money is, of course. But all to say, these systems are quite capable of generating the kinds of stories that we would have a hard time distinguishing from something authored by a human in the story telling tradition. So that's one big development. That's one big piece, the story generators. A second really important piece of this puzzle has to do with the personalization algorithms that you probably know from Spotify or Pandora, or that you might know from Amazon or Netflix. Here, your past behaviors and the behaviors of people like you, often your friends, are kind of used to figure out kind of exactly where you fit, what you might like and might not like. These are really powerful tools, and they're very quickly evolving tools. And these too will be part of these future storytelling systems. It's not just about generating the story, it's about figuring out how to target that story. And that's where these taste algorithms are so crucial. So again, imagine this being deployed for the purposes of story. And finally, story generators, taste predictors. The third piece of this puzzle, and that's now been solved, has to do with synthetic media. This allows makers to produce things that have never really been filmed. Now, this is probably best known through its moniker deep fake, where you can make someone do something they never did. In this case, Arnold Schwarzenegger saying something, or that actually this woman is doing, not Schwarzenegger. You can transfer the video information from the face of a live human, or you can do the same thing with audio. Also, there's a set of new tools that allow us to edit on the fly in real time. So we can basically, we're right about at the point where we can start to tell a moving image story synthetically using real, information from real people in the world on the fly for you. So this is happening fast. And what makes it all work are back data, past behavior, like in the case of Google, it knows where you've been, and that's the basis for its predictions about where you want to go next. But the real-time biomarkers are moving also quite quickly. So here's an example from the world of VR. Some of you might have worked with 360 VR, basically a video that's a video panorama. That's first generation. Second generation would be more like advanced Oculus or HTC Vive systems, where you can walk behind things, or you can change things in the world. You can touch things and move things. But the third generation is called foveated rendering. And basically the system watches your eyes and it creates the world where you look. The problem with VR right now is that we're creating a whole 360-degree world. It all has to be rendered, but you can only see a small part of it. With foveated rendering, the idea is that we will only make the parts you look at, and it can be rendered as quickly as your eyes can move. Now, that's great from a technical vantage point, but actually what this system allows is something quite different. We know where you're looking, and we can tell by the dilation of your pupils whether you're interested or not. This could also be a navigational device for pushing someone through a story world. There's a bunch of other ones. This comes to us from China. It's a EEG tracker. 5 degrees of emotion can be tracked with this helmet, and it's a scary thought, but there you go. These kind of wristbands do the same thing, right? We can tell by your galvanic skin response or your heart rate how you're reacting to something. So all these sensors can and other ones as well. There's a whole industry in this space right now. At this, Heidi was in our lab doing this kind of work. Facial recognition systems we get, these are emotion recognition systems, and the camera on your camera is capable of reading your facial reaction, your emotional reaction to advertisements in real time. So basically what we're looking at are all these different sensoring systems as being used as navigational instruments for story worlds, for elaborate story environments. Think Disneyland again, or think Bandersnatch. Any of the systems I've just shown you could be used to kind of guide you through those spaces. I want to give a couple of quick examples and stop. Notes on Blindness is a VR experience about a man who went blind, and he audio recorded the progress of blindness. What's interesting with this, if you see it, and it's not a well-advertised feature, if you sit relatively still for the experience, it may only take 10 minutes. But if you actively look around, if you move around, move your head, look left and right, up or down, this could be a 15-minute experience. The system tracks your physical behavior, and on the basis of that physical behavior, either extends the narrative experience or compresses it. So it's very subtle, but this is a story world that is responding to your physical behaviors. Here's another one. Wolves in the Walls is another VR system that uses AI for the character. The character is actually kind of informed by your interactions, by your movements, by where you're looking. Will call you back, hey, you're not paying attention, come back here and look. So again, your bodily, your physical interaction changes the kind of story that's being told and changes the character's interactions with you. This is a project, it's a hologram, in fact, at USC and the Shoah Foundation, where hundreds of hours of Holocaust survivors' testimony were stored up in the system. And basically, this is a system that uses natural language processing to listen to what you're saying. And then you can ask this guy anything, like, what street did you grow up on? What did you have for breakfast? I'm not sure if you can get that specific, but you can be pretty specific and he will answer. So that kind of almost live interaction is possible through advances in natural language processing. In the games world, there's quite a bit of development going on. You're looking on the right at an image from Grand Theft Auto 5. And there's a domain of characters called non-player characters that are getting more and more intelligent and have more and more agency. So in other words, you're playing with the computer, and you're now in some systems even able to talk to these characters. So this is really, I think, making quotidian, making normal this idea of interacting with intelligent worlds, smart worlds, and responsive narratives. Narratives for which there is no fixed outcome. It's rather like what we do in this world that will determine what our experiences are. And finally, this is a British example, Riot by Karen Palmer. Basically, this is a system that watches your face. That's why we're seeing the back of the viewer and there's so much illumination on them. A documentary about a riot, or story about a riot. And depending upon how your face reacts, depending on whether you grimace or smile or whatever, this is looking at some of those systems we looked at earlier, sensor systems, the narrative will change to respond to those gestures you're putting out. It's reading you, and in so reading, altering the text that you're seeing. So really fast, there's some implications here. Like Alice, this world that we're walking into or coming into is a very different one, and it can be a fun world or it could be a dark world. And that really depends on how, what we expect and what we insist upon as informed citizens. So basically, to sum it up here, AI systems, the sensors and algorithms working together, are capable of shaping our textual environments, determining which texts we see, creating texts and versions of texts, and interacting with the perceived preferences and behaviors of viewers. Does this by reading the reader. But the key questions here are about agency. Who is in charge? What parameters can we shape and set? Who has access to these technologies? Is this just a top-down? Is this just another thing that Oculus or Google are going to do to us? And who really controls the process of representation? These are really important cultural questions, questions that in the bigger world of storytelling, and that sounds like what you talked about yesterday, are really compelling and important. And I think it behooves us to think about this as this new regime starts to enter our world more and more as the latest and greatest. We need to have critical questions that we ask of it. So like anything, like Hobbes and Locke, it can be a world that's you could read the glass as half empty or half full. And certainly in the IT world, Mark Zuckerberg is really enthusiastic about what algorithms can do to us. And someone like Elon Musk is sounding the alarm bells. So I'm going to be a little agnostic in that sense, and leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, William. This already inspired burning questions on our chat box, which will come back later. But yeah, and we can see those contrasting sentiments in our discussions as well. So thank you, Chris, Pam, and everyone else who has been so active and discussing such important questions. And we are very, very pleased to have our second speaker today, which is a very dear friend of ours, especially for the digital storytelling family. I still remember the conference beautifully organized by you, Burcu, in Ankara, I think in 2014, something like that. So you are a big part of our common pathway and common story. So thank you for coming. And Tandrima will read a short biography to introduce you.
Thank you very much, Antonia.
Hello, everyone. Burcu Simsek is an associate professor at Hacettepe University, Faculty of Communication, Department of Communication Services, Ankara, Turkey. She is the founder and the coordinator of the Digital Storytelling Unit at Hacettepe University and has facilitated over 80 digital storytelling workshops in Turkey and abroad with various groups on diverse themes since 2009. All of the digital stories from these workshops can be accessed via the www.digitalstoryhub.org and www.storieswithoutvisa.org. She completed her PhD with the thesis on digital storytelling and feminist activism in Turkey at Creative Industries Faculty, Queensland University of Technology in Australia in 2012, under the supervision of John Hartley and Jean Burgess. She has an MSc degree in Women's Study from Ankara University and a BA degree in English Language and Literature from Hacettepe University. She was the convener of the 5th International Digital Storytelling Conference, Create, Act, Change at HTTP University in 2013. She started her career as a journalist in 1998. Since then, she has been involved with stories and storytelling. She is interested in digital storytelling, women's studies, oral history, migration, and health communication. Recently, she focuses on migration and food cultures, running DST workshops with women from migrant and host community in Ankara for social cohesion. Please welcome her. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, I'll start sharing my screen. Actually, I would like to welcome you all to my kitchen with a presentation titled In the Kitchen. Actually, I'm one of these very lucky women and in the whole world, I can say that I have a room of my own. And yesterday, I was taking part in this great event from that room. So this, the presentation is actually a story. It has a story of its own, and it's very exciting to take part in this great event. So I would like to thank you, Antonio, and the whole team at your university. And I'm very, very pleased to see my friends from our great community, and also making new friends. Even though virtually, we are getting connected. So that means a lot to me. And today I will try to add onto the presentations that we listened yesterday. And thank you very much, William. It all gets connected somehow. And actually, I'll try to talk about public spaces. And as Antonia mentioned about our conference that we organized with great help of my dear friend, Joe Lombard, my colleague, my mentor. Actually, it was some bit of an adventure for me when I attended the 4th conference in Lillehammer with the name Create, Share and Listen. And with the 5th one, we inherited Create, and we added the concepts Act and Change. And right after the conference, a few days later, we had this amazing, great, in a way, very, very sort of inspiring in many ways act going on. You might have heard about it. This is Gezi Park that you can see on the left corner. And then people's protests to keep that land that belongs to all. So, and that triggered some bit of a social moment. And I remember with my friends that we have been exchanging messages, and they said that they were just saying, oh, look what happened. We said create, act, change, and something is happening. So years later, now I have 2 other images. These are from a park, and you can see people with masks. And just in seven years, when we faced with a global event, pandemic, we started thinking about public spaces, open spaces, parks, rather than just getting into closed indoor spaces. So I really wanted to start with pointing to this and move on. And with with this presentation, I'll try to, with this talk actually, I'm trying to think about border, the concept of border, and stories and storytelling. You can see that that this very central image I have is from a social media account that I follow. And when I was on the left-hand side again, you have my whole private sort of interactions during meetings with my friends from Germany, Ankara, and seeing my little nephew, and trying to keep in good spirits at home. But at the same time, on the other corner, I have the my public sort of visitors, that my courses or the meetings that I have to attend for my position at the university. So in a way, we're just rethinking about space, and but we have been thinking about it long before. And here I start with saying, what is this business about kitchen? This is the core of the story, actually, with my dear colleague that most of you have met during the conference here, Şengül İnce. Actually, her academic interest is material culture and food cultures. So we have been spending a lot of time sharing an office and actually building up this digital storytelling unit all together. And we had this dream of putting kitchen at the very center of everything. And I remember during the conference here in Ankara, I was making a remark about actually saying, what if we can facilitate workshops in the kitchen while we're cooking, while women are cooking and telling their stories. So there comes a point that most of our inspiration and imagining really happened out of the office while we were in our private time cooking or doing some preparations. So we see kitchen as a place, a space that we act and change, actually, putting different things all together, and more hands actually being on play. So rather than talking about more of a, I'm talking about face-to-face interaction and storytelling. And so some of my colleagues might know that this also started with a workshop we have shared earlier. Before March the 8th event, actually we organized a workshop with women writing thesis, PhD thesis. And the very ordinary objects from kitchen was used. And this workshop was something that we have done for ourselves. And then followed a collection of stories of food. That's where actually I'm connecting all our journey in our public sort of role at the university, and then connecting it to the other spheres of our lives. So Şengül İnce decided to integrating digital storytelling as a course component into her food culture and identity course. Actually, yesterday, this was something that was going on with our discussions about museums and small-scale spaces and spaces for sharing experiences about cuisine, culinary stuff. So we end up having several of these workshops. And also collecting the stories about everyday objects. Again, she decided to integrate digital storytelling workshop component into her courses of history of everyday life and everyday life studies. And stories about very ordinary objects like a pencil, a toy, or shoes were told by the participants of that PhD course. And also with the coursework, actually, we try to train facilitators in the scope of the master's course, and we called this collection as the roots, actually. That's the stories of the story workers, I call. The people who will be going out to collect stories from groups. So that course, in a way, provides all the experience and the experience collected through running many workshops, but at the same time, just giving the soon-to-be facilitators how they will be experiencing various aspects. My colleagues, most of my friends know that I am a strong supporter for face-to-face, workshop-based digital storytelling. And this very strong desire or feeling was really tested by the COVID-19 pandemic. Because I had to run the Roots workshop, the workshop in the course online. And the good side is that I learned I can do it. But the funny side is I don't want to still. And we had this great people, all the team was, it came to a point that was some sort of a relief for all of us telling all these stories. And with the story work, I would say, just leaving a personal trace about our history is very important. And not always all of the facilitators, not at all of our workshops, we're able to tell our stories. So this time, these frogs are a part of my study room, collected all through the years, gifts from my friends. And I decided to tell a story about a friend, just making little compositions with these objects in my COVID-19 habitat, actually. And this brings me to this expanding, creating listening spaces aspects of what we are doing, and how we, even though I really like digital storytelling workshops, I realize that I enjoy being involved with other forms of storytelling practices. So building of virtual connections on time, events here and there, in Australia, in Turkey, sort of bridging, we can say, narrative bridge connections. And this project that I'm sharing the exhibition poster here, Aynı Şehrin Çocukları, is a project that we created. It's an exhibition it's an exhibition by children, for children, and we created it with Şengül with the idea that in the premises of our campus we have a preschool, and what we try to do is we find ourselves responsible for connecting our campus, because we're a little bit outside the city, even though the university has a in-city campus. We want to connect ourselves with the community. So children from our preschool started drawings to be sent to their friends that are living in another part of the city, and they come from various countries like Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and we call the name says that the children of the same city. So what unites them is just being at Ankara at that particular time, and then we had them coming together in the garden of the preschool. That's where I put a little sign here about the border. They were not, the visiting refugee kids were not allowed to enter the preschool building because they were outsiders, and the families had some bit of, some parents wanted to have them in, but some parents were not very keen on. But the director of the preschool insisted on hosting these kids in the garden, and we had a great day. All these children talked about their drawings, and they actually told stories to us. And it takes time to transfer all this very practical workshop experiences to academic writing. And what we discuss is that we cannot write as fast as we put ourselves into the workshop environment, because we desire to run workshops besides our teaching roles at the university. And international students can sort of have a part of it. And a story intervening public and private. Actually, this part is where I get the inspiration for this cover from Teresia and Mark's edited book, because it was on my table when I was writing this book with the force of my colleague Şengül, because she told me, write something in Turkish so that we have something that we can give to the NGOs, and this is open access, fully ebook type of a thing. And the cover talks about my heritage, my grandmother and my mother. And actually, it gives the whole story. The story starts with this image and my grandmother talking to me about this image. And we try to sustain a virtual home for stories, and stories of border. Actually, we have two websites, that's digitalstoryhub.org, and we try to keep these both websites outside of the institution. And Stories Without Visa is formed in 2017 with our work that we started with UNHCR about migrants and with refugees. And it hosts the migrant stories and the events and information about them. Along the line, we had emerging dialogue in our university as well about digital storytelling with the Faculty of Education, Faculty of Sports Sciences. And this platform, CELIC platform, was formed with colleagues from actually the network was organized in a way, get together as a part of a wider project. But I tried to contribute with the digital storytelling aspect, where students of teacher training programs can use digital storytelling to organize, to plan their classes. And actually this sort of dialogue and mobility, navigating in the campus, but also going outside the campus and going to another city, running a workshop in Istanbul. Again, carrying refugee and local kids to a university campus was possible with this project. Recount, we say, and the participants of this workshop told us that refugee and local kids, that was the first time they have been to a university, giving an idea about how people get their education, and it's a faculty of architecture, so it was very, very interesting for them. A very old building. So we try to get this experience of spaces and storytelling act going on together and creating another, adding up to the story of the participants and also story of us as well. And bringing the storytellers to the campus is another important thing that we should be doing, because we have to take care of the stories. So I will only share this story with you. This is a story by a woman from Syria.
أنا فاطمة من حلب، عمري 54 سنة، عندي أولاد ودرسوا في الجامعة ثم توقفوا عن الدراسة بسبب الحرب، والآن يعمل أحد أبنائي في تركيا صناعة الحلو، والقرفة أساسية في صناعة الحلو، لأن القرفة التي تزرع في تراب سوريا غير موجودة في العالم، وأنا ما لقيت رائحة القرفة التي موجودة في سوريا في العالم، لأن القرفة لها رائحة ذكية وطعم شهي، والقرفة توضع على الحلويات مثل الهريسة والشعيريات.
And this brings us with the work that we do with refugees in multiple spaces, like carrying the exhibition to Jar Modern, which is a museum area. Digital stories were screened for a week, and a public event was made. I'm thinking about borders and cultures. I really wanted to put this map here, and you can see that we have slices of baklava. If you check this from a gastro-diplomacy perspective, there'll be borders set. There'll be great discussions about it. With people, Syria, they would say baklava is ours. Turkey, Greece, but at the end of the day, what really matters is that we all enjoy it. So this brings us to this geographical region. Here I am at the very center of Anatolia. And the area that we worked was Mersin, Kahramanmaraş, Gaziantep, Hatay. They are very close to the Syrian border. And we worked there with students at higher education. And what really united us were with all the traumatic experiences and everything that we have heard, and they have told us about hope. So that really connects me to yesterday's Michael's optimism. So hearing these stories, that the optimism for future and also putting things all together is a part of this story about making or experimenting with other forms. So we created another round of workshops. So in our 10th year, we managed to run a workshop at a kitchen while we were hearing about the stories of the recipes. And also we were listening to people, women, talking about telling us their heritage, actually. So I'm very glad that we managed to do this, complete the workshop before the pandemic, because we completed the last of 3 workshops on February. And the book will be out very, very soon. And we integrated the digital stories inside of the book to be followed. So that makes me come to the point that why in the kitchen with all these? And with Sarah Ahmed's Living a Feminist Life book is is some sort of a guidebook for me. Actually, I would call this storytelling engagement a sort of survival kit for myself and for most of the team, because we suffer from institutional challenges, the changes at the higher education system. It's really hard to sustain relations with partners being in balance, navigating ways to protect stories. This was one of the hardest things, because working with various institutions, why don't you change this part of the story? I'm not the owner of the story. The owner of the story is someone else. So just communicating this was even very tiring. Increasing accessibility, translation and subtitling. I know these are very small issues, you would say, but they take time, and they're part of the story business. And building new connections, and most important of all, I think it's a way of coping with life for us people who carry the responsibility to create spaces for telling stories and spaces of listening. So thank you very much. Çok teşekkür ederim. That's in Turkish. And I would definitely enjoy a cup of coffee with you all, and hope to enjoy that in a very close future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Burcu, not just for your talk, which actually triggered a lot of discussions in the chat box, but in particular for the important work you do. So thank you for that. we are grateful for that. So I think we are ready for our third speaker today. I just want to check that Karen is with us and she's doing well with her drawings as she did yesterday, just to check that we are doing well, that she's been inspired by our discussions to make new drawings. Oh, very happy to see my dear colleague Lindsay Bakewell that joined us. So thank you, probably with her newborn baby. So we are getting ready then to introduce our third speaker, and I'm delighted to have with us Michael Mason.
Hi everybody, so I'm introducing Michael Mason to you today. So Michael Mason is responsible for the Smithsonian Folklife Festival on the National Mall, Smithsonian Folkway Recordings and the Ralph Rinsler Folklife Archives and Collections and Educational and Cultural Programs at the Centre for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. Under Mason's leadership, the Centre completed its first strategic plan, increased work on cultural sustainability and intercultural dialogue, and expanded community-based cultural heritage documentation and collaboration. During his tenure, the Centre has strengthened his financial base by starting an endowment raising more than $2.5 million as part of the Smithsonian Capital Campaign and accepting the second largest gift in the Centre's history. Mason has invested in bringing talented staff to the Centre, hired a new Smithsonian Folklife Festival Director, a Deputy Director and a Curator for Cultural and Linguistic Revitalisation. Mason was appointed Director at the Centre in April 2013. Previously, he worked at the National Museum of Natural History, which he joined in 1994 as an exhibit developer and co-curator of the African Voices exhibit. In 2007, he became the Chief of Exhibit Development and Project Management, and then in 2009, the Director of Exhibition. During this time, he was instrumental in the development and opening of the David H. Coate Hall of Human Origins in 2010. Mason first joined the Smithsonian in 1992, working at the Anacostia Community Exhibition. A champion of cultural sustainability, Mason is one of the leaders in the Smithsonian's Recovering Voices Initiative, a signature of program in the Consortia of Understanding for the American Experience and World Cultures. Mason earned his bachelor's degree in American Studies at the University of Oregon. Trained as a folklorist, he earned his master's and doctorate degrees at Indiana University. He has been studying the cultures of the African diaspora since 1987. His book, Living in Santeria, Rituals and Experiences in an African-Cuban Religion, was published in the Smithsonian Institution Press in 2002 and was nominated for the Victor Turner Award for Ethnographic Writing. He is also part of the founding faculty of the Masters of Arts in Cultural Sustainability program at Goucher College in Towson, MD. So thank you, and over to yourself.
Can you hear me all right? Thanks. My internet is a little bit slow. There are three of us in our house all using it, and it sometimes gets a little choppy. So forgive me if that happens. Thank you for the lovely introduction. It was very thorough, and you all know much more about me than you probably need to. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm coming to you today from Washington, D.C., traditionally the lands of the Piscataway people whose connection to the land here continues. Today, I want to talk to you about storytelling from a wide variety of perspectives, and I have to say I'm really grateful for the presentations that have come before mine, the work that William's doing in these story spaces that are really, I would say dehumanized almost, is a fascinating space. I mean, that lack of the question of agency is a key one for me. So I'm going to shift over now and This is interesting. I'm not able to share my screen. We practiced before and it worked fine, but it's, let me try again. Okay, here we go. There we are. So today I want to talk about cultural sustainability and working with the stories that matter most to specific communities. I'll give you a little bit of theoretical background. I'll talk about Afro-Cuban, Afro-Latinx divination, which has been a cultural form of storytelling that I've been working on for more than 30 years. Share some stories that matter from Smithsonian Folkways recordings, where we have a long history of trying to share stories from underrepresented communities in the United States and beyond, and then delve into a cultural sustainability project that we have in a rural community in northern Catalonia in Spain, to explore how we're gathering stories as a way to help communities manage their own futures. In the same way that the question of who is writing stories has been a big part of the conversation over the last 2 days. For us, there's an important connection between storytelling and cultural sovereignty. So I want to start by just laying that out. So I want to run through a few of my intellectual ancestors because I think they provide important mileposts, let's say, for the thinking that has informed my work. William James was, of course, the brilliant intellectual at the beginning of the 20th century, working in radical empiricism. And his work really makes clear that stories are one of the most important ways to reveal relationships between things, people, and ideas. He was working against kind of disembodied notions of truth, and radical empiricism was a move to ground philosophy and social engagements in our understandings from our own experiences, and story was a key part of his thinking. Hannah Arendt and the politics of storytelling, this bridging the public and private, that tension that exists between the stories that we carry within ourselves and the stories that our communities will listen to or hear, the kinds of repressions and silences that we all engage in individually and collectively as a way to make it through the world. And obviously the previous presentation touched on some of those same ideas. Michael Jackson, not the pop singer, but the anthropologist from New Zealand, who was my professor at Indiana, really took Arendt's ideas and added an existential quality to it, and a focus on storytelling as a vital strategy for sustaining our sense of agency as we're facing uncontrollable circumstances, whether that's, he's worked a great deal with the stories of migrants and refugees. And so certainly that's one of the experiences of thrownness and that he's paid a lot of attention to. But he also stresses, as some of us have in the chat, that storytelling changes our experience of the world and the way in which things are in the world. My colleague Kiran Singh Sarah has written a great deal and done a lot of programming around what he calls stories that matter. And I've borrowed that phrase because I think it's quite elegant and it speaks to people. And he is very much focused on the ability of stories to bring people together and articulate challenges and injustices and begin to build coalitions to make change. He's currently the director of the International Storytelling Center in Jonesboro, Tennessee. At Smithsonian Folklife, we work extensively in cultural sustainability, and a key piece of that, when we talk about cultural sustainability, we're talking about fostering relationships, building understanding of the social and cultural environment in which our work is happening, and guiding, having that knowledge and those relationships guide interventions to help the well-being of communities and their cultural heritage. And I want to say very clearly that we are interested in their heritage deeply and in the individual people deeply. Sorry. My apologies there. My phone took over my computer for a moment. Can you see me now, Antonia? Can you see the screen again? Thank you. My apologies. The issue of fostering relationships and building understanding are really key. And we do this frequently through various kinds of storytelling, which I'll get into later. But this really has been informing our work at Smithsonian Folklife for the last 6 or 7 years. So now to some examples, from a wide range of spaces, which I hope will be helpful as we reflect. A lot of my own work has been on Afro-Latinx divination, sometimes called Afro-Cuban divination. This is a divination system used extensively in Cuba, Mexico, Venezuela, the United States, that has its roots in West Africa, primarily in Yoruba-speaking communities in Nigeria and Benin. It's linked to Ifa divination, which is actually got a more famous remit, I suppose. But the process I don't want to go into because it's quite complex, but it involves casting 16 cowrie shells. They produce a number, in this case 6, and that they are cast a second time, which creates a second number. And that essentially, that number has a name, which links to a specific body of texts. There are 256 basic variations, and in practice there are infinite variations. Each of these divination signs, these 256 variations, contains specific stories which are seen as precedents to the experience of the person who's being divined for. So this is really a casting of experience into traditional stories. With that, there are proverbs, there's advice, there are traditional ceremonies that go with these divination signs. And it works remarkably well to help people articulate their experience and provide a shared narrative between the client and the diviner about what's happening in the person's life. I want to walk through an example, Oche Mei, which is 5 cowrie shells followed by 5 cowrie shells. And I'm just going to talk about the proverb. I'm not going to delve into all of the stories. The dominant proverb here is the blood that runs through the veins, la sangre que corre por las venas. And this single proverb indexes literally the blood that runs through the veins and problems with blood vessels, blood-borne diseases, from leukemia to things like diabetes, sugar in the blood. So there's a whole health component that's touched on in the conversation between the diviner and the client. Because the blood that runs in the veins is connected to the people who gave you life, it links to the whole world of the ancestors, which is very big in African-inspired, in African traditional religion and African-inspired religions around the world. And there can be support from the ancestors, there can be challenges from the ancestors, there can be latent family trauma. All of these things are indexed by this divination sign. Romance, attraction, sexual intimacy are also a key part of this sign. So questions about relationships, intimate relationships always come up when this divination sign comes out. And as the diviner raises these issues, the person, the client is able then to stop and tell stories that link their own experience. And so you might have somebody who's talking about the fact that, yes, they were recently diagnosed with diabetes, which they might have inherited from their grandparents. And they might also tell another story about a relationship, a romantic relationship that's thriving or failing. Because it's connected, the sign is connected to romance and sexual intimacy, it obviously frequently touches on gestation and childbirth as well. And of course, it gets very gendered in this space, and that's an important piece of this. All of these things are connected to one of the goddesses in this tradition, a goddess named Oshun, or Ochun, the goddess of sweet water. And here Beyonce has very actively borrowed the symbolism of Oshun for some of her recent performances. But beauty and feminine power are a key piece of this space. Oshun is the river itself. And so often what is prescribed after all of these stories have been elicited is some kind of ritual done at the river itself. This is a picture from the Rio Almendares in Havana, where people are actually doing a ceremony for Oshun in relationship to this divination sign. So you have, of course, a series of stories that are elicited by the divination. You have the story of the divination experience itself, and that then leads into another story about the ceremony that happens. This interests me in this context because this process locates the unique positionality of the client as a partner, as a parent, as a human body that might be suffering or thriving. It really elicits multiple parts of a person's identity. And when I first started writing about this, intersectionality had not been articulated as a concept, but I would say now, if I were writing about it, that it really gets to the heart of a person's intersectionality and elicits different stories. In practice, it captures stories, I would say, of the whole person, and that's incredibly powerful. And I would argue a key piece of the work of storytelling. And it's always moving into the future. That's what the ritual response does. It moves the story into the future. So there's a telos, a kind of end that we're moving towards in the process. I want to switch gears radically here and talk about stories that matter. I had selected this example even before Ruki started talking about gaps in the stories. The Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage's history has been all about sharing stories from that weren't getting a lot of airtime in other parts of the Smithsonian. We've been at this for more than 50 years. This is a portrait of a musical group called Our Native Daughters that produced an incredible album that was nominated for a Grammy last year. And the album really looks at African-American women's experience in a profound way. And the album, because it was so direct and explicit and so beautifully produced, really had a major impact. And within the space of digital storytelling, we made a video about the making of it. And I actually want to play a couple minutes of this video. I should say that these four tremendous women worked very closely with our cinematographer to make this video. So they were completely engaged in reviewing the edits. And they have used this in their own ways, although it also sits on our various social channels and on our website.
Michael, we're not hearing the sound.
Oh, that's so sad.
We all do
Okay,
it. When you share screen, you got to hit that little button, right? So.
Which button am I
When you
supposed to
hit the
to
share
that?
screen, it's a little button in the bottom left-hand corner that says share computer sound. So you have to unshare. Well, actually, you can do it from the pull-down view options at the top of your screen. You can pull down the view options connected to the Zoom where it says stop share next to that in your
Yes,
Zoom.
next to that.
It should say view options. And you should be able to turn the sign on. It's part of the way you would stop sharing your Zoom screen. So, or you could hit the stop button, and then when you reshare, right as you open it, there'll be share computer sound in the bottom left corner.
Okay.
It's time for sure. I really want to hear this. This is why. Did it work? Did you see the button?
No, I didn't see the button, so I'll put this in the chat. It's a powerful video that includes the performance of the song, but also the artists reflecting on what it means to them, where they came up with the story, and what the creative process was like as they're talking about a woman being lynched. So it's incredibly powerful, and I'll put it in the link. I'm sorry that I couldn't sort out the sound there. I want to switch gears now to the work that we're doing in northern Catalonia. This is a town of 3,000 people in one of the least populated counties in all of Catalonia. We call this project Som Val Bas. We are the valley of the Bas. Val d'en Bas is the name of the town. This picture has some key people that I just, the people in the front, the gentleman in the black in the middle with the glasses is the mayor, and the person next to him here is my research partner, Chel Martin. And there are some students here who worked on the project as well, and everybody else is community members. I won't go into everybody's names, but they're fabulous folks. As I said before, our work in cultural sustainability is very much focused on storytelling. We see cultural sustainability as a reciprocal research practice, which means that we and our partners formulate the goals. In this case, the goal was to understand what people were concerned about in the Val d'en Bas culturally and work with them to make a plan for the future of managing their culture. It starts by having relationships and hearing people's stories, and then eliciting more stories to foster relationships. Those stories then engender intersubjective knowledge about the context, and then they become the basis for shared action. This is a kind of overview of our process. Starts with relationships, as I said. There's some kind of research or assessment, in this case, cultural mapping, which I'll get to in a minute. There's a community visioning process, which often involves co-creation. There's specific projects, and then there's evaluation. I want to stress the big arrow at the bottom. At every step, we are inviting people into the process and telling them where we are in the process and inviting feedback. So last week, we finished with a short redux of our cultural mapping, talking to 4 different groups of people because we wanted to capture how they were responding to COVID, how COVID was affecting their cultural life. As I said, lots of community engagement throughout the process. In this case, we trained 20 students, this is most of them, but not all of them, to help us with cultural mapping. These were master's students or anthropology and cultural heritage students in their last years at local universities. They interviewed 650 people in this community of 3,000 people. That's 40% of the population that we were allowed to interview. In the European Union, my understanding is you're not allowed to interview anybody under 16. And so we interviewed 40% of the population. We took the stories that we gathered about what mattered to people, and we returned them to the community in 4 meetings over a long weekend. that were really well attended. And our next step was to co-create interventions that would respond to their concerns. That was put on hold. That was supposed to be in April, but that didn't happen, as you can all imagine. So the big things that we heard were three. The Waldenbos is this rich flatland valley that used to be the bottom of a glacial lake. So there's deep, rich soil. Rural life is key to people's sense of who they are. And the landscape matters to people deeply, that you're looking at the edge of a dormant volcano here that is one side of the valley. So these were two of the key aspects that people brought up. Some specific traditions that people talked about was a tradition of outings or hiking, excursionismo, they call it, excursionism. People gather, they go on group hikes that mix an attention to social cohesion, cultural heritage, and natural heritage. So people have walked through a forest together to come to this building. They learn something about the building. They also are learning about plants and enjoying each other's company as they go. One of the things that emerged is the transformations in the landscape since Spain joined the EU. The forest is moving down from the mountainside because there are new rules about clearing, and it's meant that certain paths to springs have disappeared. These springs were traditionally a space for recreation and socializing, and so that has been cut off in some ways. There's also less water in the valley because of climate change. So one of the questions that people are asking is, if there isn't swimming, would people still want to have social activities here? And there's talk about clearing paths, and these are some of the interventions that are under discussion, though nothing has been decided yet. A third area after landscape and the rural way of life was values. And it was fascinating. There was tension between older folks and folks under 25. The folks under 25 really were focused on wanting to have a stronger sense of towns. This is a very large municipality that was historically 6 different towns that have been united administratively, but opportunities for people to come together and do things like have a concert and dance the sardana in the plaza in San Privat here. These kinds of social activities really matter to young people, and older folks are very open to them, but they don't register as important. Whereas for the older folks, family really was a major thing. This is my friend here in the middle, my friend Jose Zamora and his family. But the focus on family was very significant. The focus on being good neighbors, looking out for people when they were sick, sharing foodstuffs. If your garden had a bumper crop of tomatoes, sharing that with your neighbors. These values are being actively debated and obviously impacted in some ways by COVID. The other big concept in Catalan culture is convivencia, which is the idea of living together and sharing. I love this picture. It's from a summer camp for kids where they're having a communal meal. And there are communal meals on a regular basis in towns and small towns in Catalonia, where they bring out tables in the streets and people eat with their neighbors. And I just love this because they're teaching that at this very young age, getting along with each other, sharing a sense of making a community together, and the fact that that requires active engagement. Again, the pandemic has challenged this, but people are finding new ways of doing it, like like many people, setting up tables that are far enough apart that it's safe, and eating outside together is something that we heard a lot in these last couple of weeks. So as a kind of stepping off, I want to be really clear that what we're doing in the Waldenbos with this cultural sustainability project is listening to stories at a very broad scale, sharing them back with people so they are feeling heard. And I should say, one of my proudest moments in this project was when the head of the opposition in the town council stood up at one of the meetings where we were sharing the findings back, and he said, "You've made a perfect X-ray of our communities. You have captured exactly who we are." That's coming from a person who was, is sort of politically opposed to the mayor, who's identified with the project in some ways, was a real accomplishment, I think. Underneath this work are some key questions, which I hope will energize us as we look towards our shared future. How do we come together at a time when so much history and so many issues pull us apart? What's at stake when we express what matters most? And that's often, usually, I would say, through stories of various kinds. And how are we transformed and empowered by sharing our stories? And I think that last question is true when the stories are about experiences that matter. And I guess that issue of value is one that I'm particularly interested in. Obviously, the stories that are coming from this digital storytelling project are very much embedded in people's lives, and they're talking about things that matter. And I'm curious to think about different forms of storytelling and how that how value fits into that. And I suppose also there are questions for me about stories that are thrust upon us, perhaps by algorithms. Not in any way to devalue that, but it's a very different kind of, there's a different set of values around that. And so I think there's a conversation to be had about the fact that not all stories are created equally, because not all stories embody the same values for the people who are telling them or finding them or experiencing them. So thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts about the power of storytelling in a bunch of different contexts, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Michael. We look forward actually to watch the video. So we got 2 links in the chat box, but if you could check if they are the right links, so probably we can play the video at the end of this session. So that's fantastic. I see so many questions, which is hard to start this discussion now. But there is one that probably goes across the 3 presentations that is coming from Lisa Galvin. Lisa, are you with us? Can you unmute yourself and articulate a bit more your question about permission and legitimacy to tell stories?
Well, I just think the thing that really struck out at me is I loved all these ideas of, complicated natures of stories and universalities that are coming into that. And especially, there was some fantastic points there about, boundaries and kind of how these are shifting right now. And I was just interested to see, in all of your research here about how you found out about who could share these stories, who was given legitimacy essentially to present these, and kind of how was this determined in the various different settings that you all conducted a lot of your research. I recognize that's a very big question, but I just think it might be an interesting piece there.
So I could start. I mean, one of the things that was interesting for us was, in a rural European context, many people who weren't born in that place think that it's not their place. And so they didn't feel like they had their perspectives were valid. And so we actually organized our conversations by starting with their first memory of the valley. And that meant that everybody got to start wherever it was. Everybody was located in the space. And then we took them through a series of questions, elicited stories. And then the last question is, where do you want the valley to be in 50 years? And so everybody could think towards the future. And we were able to include everyone from people who were born in the valley and were in their 90s to new immigrants who don't have papers, who are doing elder care in the community. Latin American folks, there's a small community of Latin American folks there doing that important work. So we were very intentionally trying to make it absolutely open and be clear that everybody's story mattered.
William, yes.
I think the domain of story finding, and I have a lab, and that's mostly what we work on, interactive environments. I think people that share a world, whether it's a game world, players of a particular game, or people that have shared an experience, or even something like QAnon, which is a little strange, but you could just sort of reread that as an alternate reality game where a lot of people are invested in gathering data, little snippets of information here, there, and sharing it. All those experiences together seem to encourage people to tell the stories they found. They come around the campfire and they share. And that sharing is really important. So it's a little different from a storytelling tradition where someone just declaims, sits and tells. This is where a lot of people have equal ability, or maybe not equal ability, but at least an equivalent claim to experience that encourages them to share what their experience of this world was. And in so doing, I put in the notes there, there's a now departed professor of journalism at Columbia University, James Carey, who writes eloquently in a book called The Art of Communication about the obsession in communication has always been transmission, sending a clean, well-written message from point A to point B. And he says, what we forget is the power of ritual. Ritual is when people stand around the water cooler, and I read the Times and someone else read the Guardian, and we share different points of view. And that exchange is really what he sees as the heart, both of communication, but also of community. They share the same root word, of course. So I think that's really valuable. And I think some story forms afford that more than others. And I think this story finding business kind of structures it a bit, gets at it. So yeah.
I just want to add something about, I've talked about our institutional settings, and with our work with women from all backgrounds, migrants in Turkey, migrants in Morocco or elsewhere, what I realized was we running a workshop and just being equals in a circle really changed the perception in a way that, okay, these people for us, we are a university-based workshop, but we engage with NGOs, but they feel that my story matters. Someone came here to hear my story, listen to me, and that means I'm an important person. So I was not very aware of this because I was going there as a woman. This is why I said this is a part of my survival kit. And then I realized that role of being in an institution also gives us, all right, I will in a way transmit your story to a wider audience. So this brings us what I feel like another layer of responsibility. At the same time, saying that everyone's story really tells something. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see that we've got Daniel Onyango with us. Daniel, can you unmute yourself? Because you shared an important comment about empowering African stories. Would you like to share some thoughts on that? As we did yesterday, we want to hear the community voice. This is an academic gathering, but we really want to hear the community voice. So would you like to share your thoughts, Daniel?
Hello, everyone. I've been following the conversation, quite interesting, like I said, and informative on many aspects. And it was quite interesting also on the issue of public space, because it's one of the areas that we are trying to push here in Nairobi, bringing stories within our public space and how we can actually reclaim our spaces through storytelling. I think my presentation, my comment was based on, now that if you look at Kenya, for example, there's a lot of stories, but these stories are, you know, based on our history of the British colonialism. It's stories that are also distorted and not a true representation of our culture and our people. So there's a big conversation going around of what are our real history in regards to our culture and our people. This conversation is ongoing, and I see some of these conversation or ideas that I've been following could be replicated and can also be an inspiration to providing an avenue for people to engage in the storytelling. How do we tell our stories without being distorted? Yeah, so that's what I meant by my comment. But I'm happy to just follow the conversation and see. Yeah.
That's great, Daniel. I think that was a fantastic, I think probably closing thought for the session today. We are getting close to 6 o'clock UK time. And Mike, I don't know if you have final remarks. And from me, again, thank you very much to you all, to the three speakers today, the 2 speakers yesterday, and all the conversation that I've been following on the chat. And I hope there will be opportunity for us to keep talking about those very, very important issues, societal challenges and problems and questions we want to, and have more questions the more we work on storytelling. I want just to say a final point about the work that this group is doing. So this summit is not ending here. There will be for sure the Digital Storytelling Conference, if possible, in June in Loughborough. The second year of activities in the US, thanks to the Smithsonian Institution, UMBC, and the Montgomery College. So we'll be in touch with additional information about other events, but also we have a book. So we are working on a book proposal. There is an edited collection. The editors are Philippa Rappaport, Daniela Gachago from South Africa, and myself. And all the people, the majority of the people involved in the committee are contributing with some chapters or what we call inspirations, and there will be additional space in a digital collection that colleagues from the Montgomery College, JISC, and Patient Voices are leading to develop. So, Mike, it's up to you to close this wonderful day again.
Well, I'm not really sure what to say. It's like being asked to comment on a sumptuous meal while you're still digesting it. I've got a feeling I'll probably have more to think, more to say tomorrow than now. But I mean, we've had a wonderful sort of rich set of presentations and discussions, and as you said, Antonia, I'm really pleased that this is the beginning rather than the end of conversations, and I'm sure we'll continue with those conversations online and indeed come the summer. One of the things that really struck me, what we've been talking a lot about today, is around the social imperative of storytelling, and there we see the great work that Karen's been doing for us on doing the visual note taking of our discussions. And I think the social aspect of storytelling is incredibly important, and because whether it is simply cooking together, or the simple act of breaking bread together, or some of the rituals that Michael talked about as well. As with storytelling, I suppose what all of those things do is reaffirm our collective humanity. And I think that's incredibly important. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. We've had, well, I think we've varied between 40 to 50 people online during this afternoon. I think we got to about 47 yesterday. So it's been a very, very rich set of collaborations. I would certainly want to thank our speakers, but also to everyone who's listened in and contributed The chat has been very fruitful as well, and it's great that we've documented this. I, for one, will be revisiting these discussions over the coming weeks. Thank you, of course, to Antonia, who, as I said yesterday, has done a lot of the heavy lifting here for us. And thank you to our students for making the introductions and to participating. I could carry on giving thanks, and we'd still be here at midnight. And I know you don't want that, because we all have other things to do. Whenever I talk, always Antonia has to say, just one more thing. And I can see she has one more thing to say. So I shall finish now and say thank you very, very much. And we so much look forward to welcoming you on our campus or in an online space in the very near future. Antonia, over to you.
It's just to remember, I know that Joe Lambert sometimes is taking screenshots of us, and they did it yesterday. I don't know, Joe, if you want us.
That's why I've been wearing a tie. Because I know Joe has been, I need to look my best for Joe.
Yeah, I just put yesterday's version, sort of worked out, but it didn't have you pose. So I would love to have you, and you're going to have to pose twice because I got to do screenshot of the one screen, screenshot of the second one. So I want you all to do the official international sign language applause. So this will be for the first one. So go ahead and applaud. Thank you, everybody. 1, 2, 3, applaud. Okay, you got to do it one more time because I got to get the second screen. Okay, 1, 2, 3, applaud. That's beautiful. You're beautiful. I will send you a new version of I'll send it to these guys, and then you'll see I put in the chat yesterday's Story Workers Unite thing. I'm always in the spirit of industrial labor relations. We're one big union of good story work. So glad to be with you guys.
Glad to have you always with us, Joe. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Grazie a tutti.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye. Hope to see you soon. It's time in the UK certainly to crack open a beer, I think, and celebrate 2 good days of discussion.